And now we will step ahead to the next item, which is the exchange of views with the European Commission and EMA on the policy on the conditions for a pediatric investigation plan. First, I would like to give the floor to the co-chairs of the Health Working Group. As the first speaker, I give the floor to Mr. Peterle.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm pleased to see representatives from Commission and European Medicines Agency at the ENVI Committee following the Health Working Group workshop on the pediatric regulation in June. At the workshop, concerns were heard over the fact that children are still too often provided with medicines that have not been properly tested. Many of them receive experimental treatments instead with few safeguards. It was a great occasion to discuss what needs to be done to change this situation. 40% of the pediatric medicines are touched by the issue of drugs not being developed for the right condition concerned. Pediatric cancers are the leading cause of children's death by disease in Europe. We need to make sure that good quality medicines are available for children. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the Commission takes the floor. Ms. Sabine Jülicher, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us for this exchange of views on this pertinent question. So the question arises obviously in the context, in the legislative context of the pediatric regulation, which is, as you know, in terms of medicines development, a fairly recent piece of legislation. So just to frame the discussion, we are talking here about 1/5 of the population, so 20%, 21% of our population are children. And as we all know and recognize, children are not just to be considered small adults, so that is true. They have a specific organism, they have specific needs. Now, when in 2002 we launched the consultation paper with the name Better Medicines for Children, we had the situation where we actually had a pretty much an absence of age and development-related research, where we had very recurrent and off-label use, basically. Off-label use was the rule at the time. And economic and ethical factors were held responsible for that situation. And more or less it was the medical doctor who, with his clinical experience, who basically, where the clinical experience prevailed, the evidence. When finally in 2006 the pediatric regulation was adopted, there were quite a number of instruments introduced, and we will be discussing the pediatric investigation plan in more detail. As many of you know, the Commission issued a progress report back in 2013, which reflected on the successful implementation of the legislation. A couple of instruments were put into place. A specific committee was organized, scientific committee was organized in the European Medicines Agency. A certain framework was put into place also to facilitate pediatric research. And really, pediatric development became an integral part of product development, a situation that was unknown, basically, since then. In 2013, we could already recognize a very promising product pipeline and quite a number of pediatric investigation plans covering many different disease areas, actually including oncology. I'm aware that one cannot see the diagram on the right, but 10% of the pediatric investigation plans that have been agreed concern oncology. Fortunately, also in the years that we have the pediatric regulation, much more data could be generated in previously neglected age groups, such as neonates. and we have seen quite a number of more age-appropriate forms coming about. So if we want to look at progress in figures since 2006, we have more than 800 agreed pediatric investigation plans. We have 95 of them completed, and you see also the rising bars. Obviously, as we all know, development of medicinal products takes its time, and obviously now, just in 2014, 2015, we are really seeing these pediatric investigation plans being completed more and more. We have also concrete and tangible results in terms of newly authorized medicinal products, specifically with the pediatric indication, which is by now in 41. We have, for authorized medicines, new pediatric indications, and we have quite an impressive number of more than 120 medicines where the dosing, the pediatric dosing, has been improved. So I just want to highlight this as we are talking about an instrument which is in terms of medicinal development relatively recent, but has already in the years 2013, 14 and 15 shown impressive results. So what is the scope of a pediatric investigation plan? The legal framework is based in defining in the concept, or is based on the concept of a disease, a condition, an indication. And also the court has confirmed that the starting point for defining the scope of a pediatric investigation plan is the proposed adult indication. So this is what is in the legal framework, and what is the starting point for the work carried out with the European Medicines Agency and the developer of a medicinal product, that they look at the starting point of the adult indication. And yes, a pediatric investigation plan may be waived if there's evidence showing that the disease or the condition is actually occurring only in adults. Moving on more specifically on to pediatric investigation plans in oncology, as I said before, around 10% of all the agreed pediatric investigation plans are performed in pediatric oncology. And one thing is very important to note: there is nowhere in the regulatory framework that it is said nowhere in the regulatory framework that companies are in any way prevented from coming forward with pediatric investigation plans for pediatric oncology products. So it is obviously always in the remit of the developing company to come forward with pediatric investigation plans. And it is also an encouragement that we have vis-à-vis developers to come forward to discuss with the pediatric committee early in the development to see if there is a possibility to also develop something for a pediatric indication. And we have seen recently that companies start to present oncology investigation plans based also on the mechanism of action. I would like to stop here, and I think the colleagues from the European Medicines Agency are going on at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and yes, we have contribution from the Medicines Agency. Mr. Jordi Linares Garcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this very important topic that we really care a lot about, and for which we are working for the best outcome for the health of children. I'd like to address some concerns raised in the workshop of June that you had, and where there has been, I think there's some need to clarify how, from a regulatory point of view, the agency addresses the definition of a condition, and also how we address the waivers for pediatric investigation plan. So I'll try to explain that as easily as possible, but if we start from the, I would say, left-hand side of the slide, the starting point of any discussion on a pediatric development comes from the identification of a potential indication in adults. That is where we'll have the application from a company that will be then reviewed by the pediatric committee, and that process is highlighted in the middle of the slide. There we have the discussion at the committee level where the committee will try to see what is the disease or condition that can include that indication in adults that is linked to the pediatric needs. And after that, there will be an agreement with the sponsor of the application on a PAP, a pediatric development, or a waiver according to the characteristics of the development and the condition. This is fundamental and critical because that underpins really the reasoning behind agreeing on a pediatric development or granting a waiver. This process has, of course, some limitations, and in fact, the first one is about Article 11 of the regulation, where we read that we shall grant waivers, particularly when there's evidence that disease or condition initially identified by a developer of a product affects only adults. In that situation, the committee is obliged in a way to grant the waiver, so not to request pediatric development. A second consideration, very important, is also that the definition of the condition, we are taking it from, development from the Commission communication, and that's a definition that applies across different regulatory areas. It's not only for pediatrics, it's also used in other regulatory environments for regulatory decisions. And last but not least, we have to say also that, as has been said before in the other slide, the start of the process is really the identification of a need for development in adults, and then, therefore, the exercise to identify how this can be developed in children. I have here a couple of examples that I hope will clarify further what I presented in the previous slide. This is a very positive example where we have as adult indication rheumatoid arthritis, a disease with immunological basis that doesn't exist in children. The exercise that the committee will do will be to look at what condition corresponds in children, and that would be juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which is in dark blue. In order to agree for a PAP, what the committee will do is to recommend a development on chronic idiopathic arthritis, which is a general, I would say, condition that can encompass both situations. On the other hand, when we have other situations that, for instance, development of products for lymphoma in adults, at the level of the committee, it's possible to agree on a pediatric development for lymphoma affecting children. But if we look at diseases that are biologically related to lymphoma in children, like, for instance, neuroblastoma, there we cannot really recommend pediatric development, or at least not require it. We could always recommend, of course, and have a voluntary PAP from the company, but we cannot really enforce development in that area because neuroblastoma will be outside the condition recognized, which is lymphoma. And that is where we can identify some missed opportunities, maybe. In the MB workshop report of 16 June, we just copied and pasted here a statement where there's a comment about the use of the preferred terms in a specific classification, MEDRA, classification of medical diseases. And there's a recommendation to use this more in order to promote development. The PDC always tries to really identify the overarching condition that would really encompass both adult and pediatric use in order to be having an agreement on PIP development. And that is done by going upwards, I would say, by going to the HLT term, which I will illustrate in the next slide, but not going to the preferred term. In fact, the preferred term is the lower level, and that could have a negative impact on going for broad development for children. And that is illustrated in this slide, as you can see. That's just an illustration from MEDRA, which is this classification that the committee has been using according to the policy published on the EMA website, where the different entry points for adult indication would be the ones that have no pediatric next to them. That would be different cancers where sponsors are developing products. And then we can then go and identify pediatric needs, for instance, for, I don't know, Ewing sarcoma, etc., and then go to the HLT, the higher level, in order to encompass all those conditions in a single pediatric development discussion with the company. So that is where we want to show really that the HLT is we think, a good mechanism in order to address these issues. But the EMA and the PTCO have been doing a continuous effort to really review when implementation was maybe not perfect, and that is the case of the review of the class waiver list, which came, what was published in July 2015. In the past, the class waivers were applied in a way that now we have identified could offer a bypass system to the discussion to the PTCO in terms of what conditions could be of interest for children in terms of development coming from the adult indication. The PTCO did a rigorous review of the list based on experience and recent data on medicines and diseases, and the outcome is that they have reviewed the class waiver list with now a limitation on the number of class waivers and, of course, of the medicines that can really escape, in a way, pediatric development. However, I mean, we still believe that there are reasons there for granting waivers in some cases, according to Article 11. In fact, now, currently, according to this exercise, now we have fewer conditions waived, and the waivers are limited to medicines in some conditions only. So just to conclude and to give floor to the discussion, we agree totally, that the pediatric regulation has led to an unprecedented progress in pediatric medicine development, and there's enough evidence to back up this statement. It's true that we cannot really require pediatric studies for medicines that are proposed for a disease that occurs in adults, but companies cannot always come for a voluntary PAP. The policy on the use of the high-level term requires really pediatric studies as much as possible. I think we are here in the boundaries of what we can do. And still, we can seek for more dialogue with companies. We are having meetings with companies to understand what are the possibilities for pediatric development, and also include interaction with patient organizations and academics groups. And we would be really interested in fostering a scientific debate around the condition definition, which is currently scientifically challenged, including the review of the EMA policy based on experience and medical progress. And with that, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. And now I give the floor to Mr. Brennan, who speaks on behalf of Glenis Wilmot, co-chair of the Health Working Group, and then Madame Grostet.
Thank you, Chair. And Glenis gives her apologies for not being able to be here, and I've been asked to say the following on her behalf. I'd like to thank Emma for coming here today to discuss this important issue. It's 9 years since we adopted the paediatric regulation, and it's undoubtedly had a positive impact on the availability of treatments for some paediatric illnesses. However, one area where we haven't seen significant improvement is the availability of treatments for childhood illnesses. Every year, 35,000 children and adolescents are diagnosed with cancer in Europe, and it's still the leading cause of death by disease for children across the European Union. And although great strides have been made in developing treatment for adult cancers over the last 10 years, this has sadly not been the case for childhood cancers. The paediatric regulation does not seem to have helped the situation, with only one new paediatric oncology drug developed since the regulation was put in place. One reason for this is that developers of new drugs can apply for waivers from the requirement to present a paediatric investigation plan, PIP, as mentioned earlier, if the drug they are developing is tended to treat an illness that occurs only in adults. Since many adult cancers do not occur in children and vice versa, oncology drugs are frequently granted PIP waivers. However, the question of whether or not a disease occurs in children does not take account of the mechanisation of action of the drug, and whether this could still be effective in treating a paediatric illness. This means that all too often drugs that could potentially treat a paediatric cancer are never tested for this possibility. For example, in the first 5 years of the paediatric regulation, 26 drugs worth a potential to treat paediatric cancers were authorised for adult use, but only half received a paediatric waiver. You've been invited here to discuss the EMA's policy on the determination of the conditions for a paediatric investigation plan stroke waiver. This is the policy developed by EMA in order to determine if conditions can be considered to occur in children. I've heard from experts that if the condition was defined by the biological or genetic abnormality, more conditions would be considered relevant to both paediatric and adult populations. I'm told that this would mean that the MEDRA preferred term, PT, rather than the high-level term, HLT. You've said this wouldn't be the case, that using the PT level rather than the HLT would actually have the opposite effect. So I'd be interested to hear from you what we can do. Why can't we look at the biological or genetic abnormality of a disease rather than just its location in the body, for example? So that where there are biological similarities between an adult cancer and a paediatric cancer, a drug developed for one is tested for its ability to treat the other. I'm sure you'll agree that the current situation is simply untenable. The 35,000 children diagnosed with cancer every year cannot wait until the new review in 2017 for this situation to change. We need to do more now. Thanks.
Thank you. Madame Grostet.
Oui. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was the rapporteur on the pediatric regulation 9 years ago. I am very disappointed at the implications of that pediatric regulation because it didn't produce the positive effects that we had hoped. It was very difficult to get it approved, but there's still a lot that could be done. And the agency recently took a decision to review its waiver decision, which I welcome, and to lift some of these waivers. But it's a drop of water in the ocean, I think. I think that the decision is not far-reaching enough. The possibility of granting a waiver to the obligation to carry out these pediatric investigation plans has been abused to date, and I am enraged by this. I have already expressed this rage in other fora. 60% of PIPs carry waivers. In the 5 first years of the implementation of the regulation, 26 drugs which could possibly be used for children were authorized for use in adults, but more than half of these were subject to a waiver with regard to PIPs. It is for this reason that together with Mrs. Wilmot, we decided to send to the Commissioner a letter with the support of many Patients Association, a letter in which we question him about this. A certain number of drugs for adults could at molecular level be beneficial to children. We know that there are many biological links between adult and children's tumors. Instead of granting waivers too easily to PIPs, under the pretext that the drug is only beneficial and is only active in adults, I would propose that on the one hand we make more flexible the procedures linked to PIPs. The procedures today are far too cumbersome, too bureaucratic to be attractive. That on the one hand. On the other hand, I would suggest that we look more closely at how molecules act when assessing the potential benefits of a drug in pediatric use. Then I have a question on the fast-track procedure when placing on the market certain pediatric drugs. In the U.S., we have the Creating Hope organization, which helps speed up this sort of assessment and the fast-tracking of drug approval. I think that we could follow that example. I think that we have incurred too much delay here. I think we have to act quickly so that the pediatric drug regulation is more active and more beneficial to children.
Thank you for your contribution. And as I didn't see Any further requests from the members? I would give the floor back to the Commission, Ms. Sabine Jülicher.
Thank you very much. I will start reacting to the questions and remarks that have been made. From a human and also institutional point of view, it's obviously very, very understandable that there is frustration. There's always frustration if you see that there are conditions, be it rare diseases, be it conditions in children, for which we do not have any treatment or any appropriate treatment. This is absolutely understandable, and that is a situation that nobody can be supportive of. I would like to come back to the regulation, and Madame Grostet, she knows very well how difficult it was at the time also to come forward with a regulatory framework. Obviously, given that the development of a new medicinal product is by the initiative of a pharmaceutical company, any regulatory framework has to provide a balance between promoting research, in this case research in children, but also not running the risk of delaying, access to new medicines for adults. So obviously in creating the PIP and the incentives and the pull and push factors in this regulation, it was extremely important to find the right balance also in terms of timing of development. And there is always a call for incentives. One fact I would like to recall is that many of the pediatric cancers are actually rare diseases at the same time. So they do benefit, or developers benefit from even more incentives that we find in the pediatric regulatory environment. They also benefit from the incentives that we find for rare diseases. In this, we do think, and I would like to reply to a suggestion to move very quickly onto a review of the 2007 of the regulation. The date before 2017 was mentioned. Yes, indeed, we expect the report for 2017. And as I said before, development of medicinal products, unfortunately, is a lengthy process. And we do believe that, concluding at this very moment in time in November 2015 on the benefits and full effects of the regulation is probably a bit premature. We as a Commission, we do work very much towards this 2017 review date, in particular because we absolutely think that we need to have certain more comprehensive evidence on before we conclude on the suitability or otherwise of the regulation. But maybe to conclude on my part, we do not share that the view that the pediatric regulation so far hasn't brought about tangible benefits. Just the opposite. I mean, there have been impressive developments in the meantime.
Thank you, and also the Medicines Agency.
Thank you very much. Maybe starting from the last statement from the colleague from the Commission, I shared the same view, and in fact that's also felt at the committee level that the regulation is a success as we speak. What we share also as, and particularly the committee, is the frustration about not being able to go beyond. And I have to say here that we are in quite a difficult situation from even a technical point of view. There's currently a quite strong debate in the medical community about how to define entities, how to define diseases. And I have to say that the setup of the regulation corresponds to the model where we define diseases by site, by histopathology, etc., not by biology itself. So there we have quite a strong class that we'll have to discuss thoroughly, because that would have consequences beyond even the pediatric regulation. And that, I think, goes also for the mechanism of action, which is something that we have been discussing and we welcome a scientific discussion, but the implementation is not, I would say, unproblematic, I would say.
Right. I detect the necessity for some further discussion, perhaps later on another occasion, or Madame Grosstedt would like to add anything to the discussion right now? Very shortly, okay, because then for 2 minutes.
Merci. Oui, oui, non, mais ce serait...
I'll be very brief. Yes, thank you. I just wanted to repeat something that's already been said and something which the Commission is aware of. To wait for the results of the study, which we will only have in 2017, is too late. The Commission does sometimes take into account the Parliament's opinion and the opinion of our committee, but to wait that long is far too long. You're saying the process takes a long time, it's too soon to take a standpoint, but it's 9 years have elapsed. We've been told that the results are satisfactory. We don't share that opinion. Let's speed things up. Let's not wait until 2017 to review the regulation in order to see what adjustments to make to said regulation so that it can be more efficient and more quickly.
Perhaps we will get back the issue later on for our committee. Thank you, everybody, for participating, for the Commission and the Medicines Agency to participate in this debate. And as we don't have any other business for today, I close the committee meeting here. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon. All right.